Hello, my name is Michael Weiss. I'm the Vice Chair of Congregation Ocean Reef, and I'm very excited and proud to be introducing you to Ambassador Michael Oren. Yesterday was the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We respectfully honor the memory of the 6 million Jewish individuals and 5 million others who perished during one of the most tragic periods in human history. Today, the Jewish community faces new challenges, encountering hostility, violence that echo the horrors of the Holocaust. In Israel, on October 7th, we witnessed the most barbaric acts of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the brutal murder, rape, kidnapping, and torture of innocent Israeli citizens. Anti-Semitism is surging both abroad and domestically, rising up over 366% in the past year here in the United States, threatening the identity and safety of the Jewish communities. However, a distinction between the era of 1941 and the Nazis and the present is the presence of the State of Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces. Born from the ashes of the Holocaust, the nascent State of Israel formed this protective force, embodying the pledge, never again. Remembering this vow, October 7th, tragedies remind us that never again is now. History has repeatedly shown that persecution often begins with one group, but seldom stops there. The targeting and persecution of the Jewish people serves as stark examples, as seen in Nazi Germany. This pattern extends to other regimes known for authoritarian and dictatorial rule, such as Assad's Syria, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Russian Federation, North Korea, and even China. In these cases, the suppression of a specific group often spirals into a broader assault on morality, human dignity, and basic human rights, culminating in widespread corruption and the erosion of fundamental freedoms. The lesson is clear. The initial persecution of one group can be a precursor to more extensive and destructive violations of basic human rights. As we reflect on the Day of Remembrance, we pause not only to mourn the innocent lives lost, but also acknowledge the enduring resilience and strength that defines the Jewish people. This courage, ingrained in our heritage, has seen us rise from the aftermath of the Holocaust, and it will see us rise again in the face of the current adversities. The emboldened spirit of the Jewish people could not be reflected any more clearly than Ambassador Michael Oren. Born in New York, educated at Princeton and Columbia, and having held professorships at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown, Ambassador Oren academic accolades also include fellowships from the U.S. State Department and the British and Canadian government. He received 4 honorary doctorates and holds 4 degrees in Middle East history. Serving as a lone soldier in the Israeli paratroopers, he fought in the 1982 Lebanon War and later held the role of Army spokesman, achieving the rank of major. His diplomatic career is marked by pivotal roles, including advisor to Israel's delegation to the United Nations, former Foreign Minister Abba Evan, and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Notably, in 2009, Michael was appointed Israel's ambassador to the United States. In his role, he interacted with major American institutions over strategic issues like the new Israel Iron Dome system and the Iran nuclear threat. Oren's tenure in politics continued with his election to the Knesset as he served deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office, overseeing diplomacy. His international influence has been recognized by publications such as Politico, The Forward, The Jerusalem Post, ranking him among the most influential thinkers in America and the world. So today, I am pleased to introduce you to Ambassador Michael Oren.
Guys, I'm going to get a little choked up before I start. I'm coming from a war zone. I'm coming from a war zone where this scene would be absolutely impossible. Impossible. Maybe you can take it for granted sitting in Ocean Reef here, that people of different religions, different backgrounds would come together in this building in peace and fellowship. It is not to be taken for granted. This, friends, is a miracle. And I wish people in my area of the world could see this and believe that it's actually possible. Because to me, it's deeply, deeply moving to me. And thank you for giving me that vision of hope for humanity and recalling what America was, is, and can be. So I was mentioning a couple of people that the greatest fear that any speaker has is putting his phone down, and in the 3 minutes before he puts the phone down, getting up on the stage, and someone says, "Are you going to comment on what just happened?" All right? You haven't seen what just happened. Believe me, it has happened a few times. It happened a few times. So I looked at my phone just now. And the headline tonight, tragically, 3 American service people have been killed in Jordan, where nobody knew they were. That's one surprise. But killed by pro-Iranian militias operating out of Syria. Killed by a drone attack. This is probably about the 145th attack on American forces in Syria and Iraq, not in Jordan. And that's quite in addition to the attacks on American, Israeli, and international shipping through the very strategic Bab el-Mandeb Straits at the tip of Yemen, tip of the Arabian Peninsula, through which about 20% of the world's commerce and oil flows. All right? And America has forces. Now, America, starting on October 10th, this is 3 days after those horrible massacres that Michael mentioned, President Biden got up in front of the world and gave a speech. And it was an extraordinary moment, I must tell you. In Israel, we all stood in front of the television sets. It was a Churchillian moment because the president got up there and said, "Listen, I've lost a wife, I've lost 2 kids. I know what pain is. I feel your pain. I know what that feels like to have the oxygen kicked out of your chest." And he made unequivocal support for Israel, categorical condemnation of terror, with the Secretary of State and the Vice President standing behind him, which is a very unusual sort of construct for a presidential speech. I've almost never seen it. And then he did something which I thought was absolutely impossible given the atmosphere in Washington, because about the only thing the Republicans and Democrats agreed on the side was isolationism, not getting involved in another foreign entanglement, certainly not in the Middle East. The president sent not 1 but 2 carrier strike groups to the Middle East. Now, carrier strike group is not just an aircraft carrier. It is a lot of ships around it. It's destroyers, it's frigates, it's submarines, about 150 warplanes. It's more warplanes than Israel has altogether, sending them to the Middle East with the message to Iran and to Hezbollah: if you're thinking about joining the war between Israel and Hamas, don't. Someone actually gave me a little cap that says "don't" on the top of it. Don't. Now, this was an extraordinary moment, but it really begs a question. Why? Now, there are conflicts going on all over the place. There's a horrible civil war going on in the Sudan. There's always a horrible civil war going in the Congo. In Yemen itself, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in recent years in the battle between the Houthi rebels and other factions backed by Saudi Arabia. America's not sending forces to the Middle East, not sending carrier strike groups. The president's not going up and giving a major speech about how now America's going to stand foursquare beside the state of Israel. No. Why is this president, why is any president standing up there and making this speech? The last day, coincidentally, the last day I was ambassador in Washington, this is beginning of 2014, I was in the Oval Office, and we're sitting there with the president, the Prime Minister of Israel, the President of the United States back there, Barack Obama, and he says the following line, which I'll never forget. I'll never forget this line. He says, "If Israel gets into a war, you understand that America will be with you." And he paused and said, "Because that's what the American people expect." Not what I would expect, but what the American people expect. And Barack Obama is saying this. Extraordinary moment. The question is, why? How do we understand the nature of this relationship, and why is it different than just any other relationship in the foreign policy world of the United States of America? What is it about this particular, what we call special relationship? And to understand that, you've got to go back. Certainly got to go back further than October 10th or October 7th or the 1973 war, or the 1967 war, or 1948, which was Israel's creation, and 1940. You got to go back. You ready for this? Got to go back about 400 years. That's where the U.S.-Israel relationship begins. 400 years when the first buckled shoe lit across on a stone off the Massachusetts shore. All right? And the owner of that shoe declared that the passengers aboard the Mayflower had just landed in Zion. Okay? I don't know who's from Massachusetts here. Am I from Massachusetts? I don't want to insult you. It's a nice state. My family's from Massachusetts. It's not Zion. Okay? But don't tell that to the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims actually thought that this was Zion. And who were the Pilgrims? Why did they conflate the New World with very much the Old World, the Promised Land? Now, the Pilgrims were a dissenting group of Protestants. And they had a lot of problem with the Church of England. And to overcome their suffering, they looked back into their Bible. The first thing, quite naturally, they looked into the New Testament. They didn't find the example they wanted in that, so they looked further back. They looked further back into that book that had been largely overlooked by Christianity for the previous 1,500 years, what they called the Old Testament. I mean, you go to churches in Europe, you don't see a lot of Old Testament, designs on churches, pretty much overlooked. And, Christian children back then were named Martin and John and right, Elizabeth and Mary. You didn't have a lot of Davids. You didn't have a lot of Rebeccas and Sarahs and Isaacs, right? You didn't have a lot, all of a sudden. And they discovered this Old Testament. And what they saw in there was extraordinary for them. They saw a God who spoke to his people in their own language. And I don't want to insult anybody, but God, as we know, only speaks one language. Hebrew. I'm sure he speaks all the languages in the world, but he only speaks Hebrew, right? And he says something remarkable to these people. He says, I'm going to rescue you from exile, and I'm going to restore you to your promised land. And the Puritans know that God doesn't lie. They take these promises very, very seriously. And they so love this story that they internalize the story. They became the new Israel. And the King of England became the new Pharaoh, and England became the new Egypt, and the Atlantic Ocean becomes the new Sinai. And they land on that Massachusetts shore, and they immediately impose a map of the Holy Land on the New World, which is, if you are from the Northeast, you're going to come to 1,000 place names that are directly from the Hebrew. All right? You see, I got a beard. My mother just passed away in Massachusetts. She's buried in Sharon, Massachusetts, like Alex Sharon, right? Sharon, Massachusetts. You're going to have Zion and Bethlehems, endlessly. Jerusalems. My favorite one is where Joe Biden's summer house is. His summer house is in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Rehoboth, friends, south of Tel Aviv. Rehoboth Beach. You like that one? Cheryl likes that. And they gave Hebrew names to their kids, and they studied Hebrew. They made Hebrew a mandatory language at all their universities. It's in the logo of Yale. It's in the logo of Dartmouth, Columbia. But James Madison, the fourth president of the United States, failed Hebrew at Princeton and had to do it a year over again. Had to repeat a year. I could commiserate. Not easy, that language. They all had to know Hebrew. And this notion that that is the divinely assigned duty of good Christians and later good Americans to help God fulfill that promise, bring the Jews back from exile, help them restore their ancient sovereignty. At the end of the American Revolution, 1783, there was a debate in Congress what was going to be the great seal of the United States. Okay? Some people wanted the bald eagle, but other faction wanted a seal of Moses leading the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt into freedom. And it was a close vote. You got the follically challenged eagle instead of Moses. By the way, it's actually the emblem of the University of Kansas today. You can find it. That emblem, right? You can see it right there, University of Kansas. It was developed by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. So that's how deeply this notion that America was the new Israel. And it also had a political ramification. That the notion that the idea of America was indistinguishable from that of a recreated Jewish state was hardwired into early colonial and early American post-revolutionary thinking. John Adams, the second president of the United States, said it was his wildest dream His greatest dream that an army of 100,000 Jews, as strong as the French army, he said, which is like the French army back then, would march back into Judea and reclaim it as a Jewish kingdom. Abraham Lincoln, 1863, promised publicly that once he restored the Union after the Civil War, he would help the Jews restore their sovereignty in the land of Israel. I live in South Tel Aviv, a place called Jaffa, beautiful. 100 yards from my house is a neighborhood called the American Colony. To this day. Why is it an American colony? Because in the 1850s and 1860s, 200 Americans from Massachusetts and Maine moved to Jaffa. They brought with them 17 prefab colonial houses. One of them still standing. Go see it. It's amazing. Why did they come to that was then called Palestine, where they were attacked by Bedouin and beset by plagues and hunger? Many of them died. They did it because they wanted to help the Jews come back to their homeland. They wanted to teach the Jews how to farm, because the Jews had forgotten how to farm through 2,000 years of exile. You couldn't have a modern state unless you had an agricultural base, right? They came there, they died. You can read all about it in a little book called Innocents Abroad, written by a young American writer named Samuel Clemens, later known as Mark Twain. He visited these colonies in 1867 and actually helped evacuate them, but some of them stayed, and they hosted Ulysses Grant, they hosted Tecumseh Sherman. William Seward visited there. Amazing. And the American colony. This day it's called the American colony because of this connection, this spiritual connection. But then it became absolutely essential. This restorationist idea became essential in the creation of the state of Israel. 1917, the British, you know your World War I history, attack the Turks. And they defeat the Turks in what was then called Palestine. And as they defeat the Turks, the foreign minister, a gentleman by the name of Arthur Balfour, who was a restorationist, he was a very religious Christian, and wanted to see the Jews restored to their homeland, wanted to promise this Holy Land to the Jews as a state. But in the British government, they said, what are you, crazy? We need Arab oil. The British Navy was just going over to oil, from coal to oil. What, are you going to anger these people? So Balfour went to Washington. And he figured, Britain wants to get America in war. Let's see if we can get Woodrow Wilson to agree to this. And he has a meeting with Wilson. We actually have the date. It was 17th of May, 1917. Goes in there. 10 minutes later, he comes out with Wilson's approval for this declaration. And by the way, Wilson's own cabinet disagreed with them. Secretary of State Lansing said, what are you, crazy? We need the oil. Why do you want to anger these people, the Arabs? And Wilson said, to think that I, the son of the manse, Wilson was a grandson, son, and nephew of Presbyterian ministers. Think that I, the son of the manse, would have the opportunity of helping the Jewish people return to its holy land. November 1917, the British issue what later becomes the Balfour Declaration, which promises the land of Israel to the Jewish people. The League of Nations then give the British a mandate. That mandate on November 1947 becomes the basis of a UN resolution creating a Jewish and an Arab state in Palestine. The partition resolution. Then the big question is, okay, is the United States going to recognize this thing? Already there's controversy, and it really fell down to one man, a gentleman by the name of Harry Truman. Harry Truman, who claimed to have memorized the Old Testament by age 14, belonged to a restorationist society, American Christians for Palestine. And his entire administration said, what are you, crazy? Really, George Marshall was the most influential American of his generation. The architect of America's victory in World War II said to Mr. President, if you recognize this Jewish state, I, George Marshall, will not vote for you in the 1948 presidential elections. Amazing. On Friday, May 14th, 1948, 6:11 p.m., Harry Truman made the United States the first country on the earth to recognize the recreated Jewish state. And they asked him, why did you do this? Why would you do this? And he said, it's very simple. He says, I'm Cyrus, he said. Let's see how many people know their Old Testament. I'm Cyrus. Cyrus was the Persian king who restored the Jews from exile, enabled them to rebuild their kingdom in the land of Israel. I'm Cyrus, he said. He believed it. Since then, almost every American president since then would have said very much the same thing. It was deeply ingrained. America was and remains, in spite of a certain fall off in church attendance, America remains the most religiously observant country in the industrialized world. More people go to a church every week. More people are still reading that Bible. Everybody is reading those promises in the Bible and saying, okay, we have to support this Jewish state because He doesn't lie. The first time I went into a congressional office from some congressman from West Texas, he's got a district that's 5 times the size of the state of Israel. He's got no Jews. And he's got opened on his desk a Bible. And he points to the book of Genesis. He says, you see where it says there, those who bless you, I will bless? That line in the book of Genesis, God says it to Abraham. He says, I believe that. How much aid do you need for Iron Dome? Literally like that. And the first time I heard that, I was like shocked. Then if they didn't say that, I was disappointed. But it was amazing. This is the deep, deep spiritual connection between Israel and the United States. And the United States has close relations with Italy and has close relations with France, but you just have that spiritual pillar. It's totally, totally unique. But Israel does come into being in 1948, not just as a Jewish state. It is a democratic state, which is not to be taken for granted in the Middle East by any chance. We have representative government. We have a very flagrant, impossible democracy where everyone screams at each other. It's not like America, by the way. If you're up here giving a speech in Knesset, everyone's going to be screaming and yelling at me. And if the seats were not screwed down, they'd be throwing the seats at me. Then we go to a coffee shop afterward and we hug and kiss. Everything's okay. Don't take it personally. It's all politics. Don't get me started. But independent judiciary still votes for all the basic freedoms, certainly many of them flagrantly observed. There's certainly freedom of assembly, freedom of protest, freedom of the press. We're the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to 9/11. We're the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We're the only country in the Middle East that has not 1 but 2 replicas of the Liberty Bell, believe it or not, inscribed in the book of Leviticus from the Bible. May freedom ring throughout the land, right there. Go to Jerusalem, see the Liberty Bell Park. It's right there. That's extraordinary. A democratic country in the Middle East. And usually, again, going up to Congress, after pointing at the Bible, the congressman will say, or the senator will say, what's really important to us is that we have these shared democratic values. And Israel is on a very, very short list of countries, very short list, that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. And we're the only country on that list that's never known a second of peace. And what destroys democracies over and over again is war. Ask the Turks, ask the Indians. That's what destroys democracies. We haven't. Not a second of non-democratic rule. Maybe our proudest achievement, by the way. So you had a spiritual connection. You had a shared democratic values. What you did not have was a strategic alliance. And anybody thinks that, that strategic alliance began in 1948 or 1967 is wrong. Israel fights the Six-Day War in 1967 without a single American bullet. It's all French stuff. Didn't. It was only on the 7th day of the Six-Day War that the President Johnson back then, woke up and said, whoa, wait, there's a little powerhouse there that just defeated several Soviet-backed armies. Maybe we should have an alliance with that country. And thus was born the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, which to this day, and I'm not exaggerating here, is the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliance which the United States has had with any foreign power in the post-World War II period. And I'll just give you the very brief survey of this. It is weapons development. Every American destroyer carries an Israeli-made gun. Every American fighter pilot, fixed-wing or helicopter pilot wears an Israeli-made helmet. Every American infantry person carries an Israeli-made bandage. All right, so that kind of level. It's joint training, especially with our Air Force, especially with our special forces. SEAL Team 6 trains in Israel. They all train in Israel. It is cyber and intelligence cooperation at the highest level. Nothing comes close in terms of the intelligence community. Very, very high. And, of course, it's American aid to Israel. American aid to Israel now at $4 billion a year plus, which, interestingly enough, is kind of a subsidy for American arms industry. We have to buy everything here, but it is part of that solid relationship between the two countries. And so you have these 3 pillars: spiritual, democratic, strategic. And there's really nothing like it in the entire world. But does that mean we agree on everything? Guess what? We do not. We do not agree on everything. We have some fundamental, long-standing differences. We had one over Jerusalem forever, which was rectified by the previous president, who finally recognized Jerusalem as our capital. But for many years, we had a barren situation where here we have this capital of one of America's closest allies in the world, which is not recognized. by that ally. And very bizarre situation, but that's been rectified. But the whole question of the peace process, what's known as the two-state solution, Palestinians, Israeli settlements, and what we call Judea and Samaria, what they call throughout most of the rest of the world, the West Bank. And then the Iran issue. Iran. I think I probably spent more time on the Iran issue in the last 15, 16, 17 years than any single issue. And we don't see eye to eye. We don't. Especially, certainly under the present administration and the previous Obama administration, very, very different. Seeing sort of a strategic attempt to pivot away from the Middle East generally. America's not dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And how do you get out of this area? How do you get out of it cleanly? Well, what's keeping us there is this problem with Iran. If we can negotiate with Iran and transform Iran into what was called a responsible regional power, maybe we can get the hell out of here. And with our tail intact. It hasn't exactly worked out, but we never thought Iran would ever be a responsible regional power. We had that theory, we had a philosophical difference, not just a strategic difference. And all of these differences are now playing out in this current conflict, in this current crisis. So on one hand, you have the President of the United States, Joe Biden. And I got to know him very, very well. He was my major point of conflict in the previous administration, and his whole task staff, which is Tony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. I don't want to sound too sarcastic, but there's a certain advantage to having the third Obama administration because all the people are the same. And I got to know them very well. There's almost not many new faces in Washington, right, Bobby? Not many new ones. But I knew them quite well. And these are all people who are, certainly Biden, very deeply committed to Israel, deeply committed to the bilateral relationship, to the strategic relationship. All of that, I think a lot of it comes from Biden's religious upbringing. We used to say that he has Israel in his heart, and it was very much on display in that speech on October 10th. Whenever I used to have private conversations with him, he's a great raconteur, and he would start every conversation with something like, "As my father used to tell me," okay? And my favorite "as my father used to tell me" anecdote was, my father used to tell me, never crucify yourself on a small cross, okay? And what Biden was doing on October 10th was crucifying himself on a very large cross, and we were the cross, because he was going to pay a price for this with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which didn't want to see the United States supporting Israel, certainly not objecting to a ceasefire in the Security Council, providing vital ammunition to the Israel Defense Forces, all that. He was going to pay a price, and I think he saw that they paid a price within the polls that showed him dropping off in the polls and very high level of dissatisfaction, certainly within his own party, the way he was dealing with this crisis. But he withstood it. He withstood it. I think that because he is a religious person, because of a strong sense of good and evil, and understood that Israel was attacked by evil, not just by Hamas, by something very, very, very dark. But since then, now more than 3.5 months have passed, and serious cracks have emerged in the Israel position. And where have they emerged? On the peace process and on Iran. There's nothing new here, nothing new. Where the administration is coming out and saying, well, on one hand, we want to have a view of the day after. We want to move toward a two-state solution with a Palestinian state in the West Bank and in Gaza. And about 75% of the Israeli people are saying, are you crazy? We just saw what happened with the Palestinian state in Gaza. 85% of the Palestinians in the West Bank support Hamas. Do you want to give us a Hamas state there? You have Mahmoud Abbas, who's the president of the Palestinian Authority, who's in the 19th year of his 4-year term because he won't stand for re-election because he knows Hamas is going to win. You're going to give it to him? All right. But there's a real disagreement, and it's a serious disagreement. And a disagreement over Iran. Here we come back to the incident with which I began tonight. The tragic killing of these 3 American service people, and we don't know if they're women or men, in Jordan, and whether the United States will take Iran to task. And to date, with one exception, one time, when the Secretary of Defense actually said that Iran was behind a missile attack on a tanker in the Indian Ocean, this administration has refused to say the I word. Just simply won't say it. Won't say that Iran is responsible for this. And now, what's going to happen with that aircraft carrier strike group, when Eisenhower is still there, is it going to do something? Is it going to strike back? Is it going to strike back at a time when the last thing this administration wants is to get bogged down in another Middle Eastern war during election year. How that's going to play out. But by not reacting, there's a political price to be paid for that too. It's very difficult. But we have this disagreement. We in Israel know, we don't believe, we know that Iran is responsible for 98% of the violence that has occurred in the Middle East over the last 3 months. Iran is the primary backer of Hamas, primary backer and trainer of Hamas. It wholly owns and operates Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the other terrorist group in Gaza. Iran operates Hezbollah in northern Israel, which is firing on us every day. It's actually firing more rockets on Israel every day than Hamas was. And Iran operates the Houthis in the Gulf of Mandeb. If you don't take Iran to task, the violence here is just never going to end. Not at all. So we have a deep policy disagreement. And it may play out. It may play out, and the administration may stop objecting to Security Council efforts to impose a ceasefire. And understand from our perspective, a ceasefire means we lose and Hamas wins. Ceasefire means Hamas gets away with mass murder. The end. And the issue of ammunition, where the administration has been providing us with vital forms of ammunition, as every administration has done over the years whenever we run low. But reported on NBC tonight, something I've known now for several days, that they're cutting back on the supply of ammunition. And that's very, very, very influential. That's very impactful for us. So you have this relationship with roots that go back 400 years, which is unlike, unmatched any other relationship which the United States has with any foreign power in the post-war period, in the pre-war period, nothing like it. Recent poll came out literally 48 hours ago, so that the American people overwhelmingly support Israel in this war. Yes, it breaks down by age, it breaks down by demographic. You know, if you're a college person living on the East Coast, chances are you're not going to be as enthusiastic about Israel's position as you are if you are a person of some years living in Kansas. There's Kansas again. All right? We love you, Kansas. But the American people remain overwhelmingly supportive and understand that this war is not just between Israel and Hamas. This war is not even between Israel and Gaza. This is a war between our civilization, our common civilization, and evil. And that if we don't win, guess what? You're next. Europe first, and then you. Yeah, simple that. We are the front line in this battle. So even what Obama said, even though he didn't say, it's what I expect, was absolutely right. If Israel goes to war, the United States is going to be with you, because it's what the American people expect. And American people do, I think, expect that, even with all the reticence to get involved in another foreign military entanglement. We don't want you to. We want to be able to give us the tools to fight our war, and so you don't have to get involved in a foreign military entanglement. It will remain. At the end of the day, the idea of that recreated Jewish state is absolutely essential and inextricable from the idea of an America. An America. I think you see it here tonight. It's quite beautiful, very moving. And note that the people who are out there protesting against Israel, there's only one flag they hate more than this one, and that's this one. And they're burning both of them. And that basically tells you all you need to know. Right there. Tells you all you need to know. Thank you all. Any questions? Pleasure. Yeah.
What do you think the ramifications would be for fully normalized relationships between the Saudis and Israel?
Okay, what would the ramifications be of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia? So let me go back 3.5 months ago to October 5th, okay? And let me preface my remarks by saying I am not a prophet. I'm not. I was in Dallas on October 5th giving a talk to some real estate folks and talking about the U.S.'s relationship. But at the end of it, I said, I got some startling news for you. I think Israel will soon be at war. There was a gasp in the audience. And I said, it's not prophecy, it's just connecting dots. What were the dots? The United States had decided to broker an agreement, a peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It's great, terrific, no downside, but it had a nuclear component to it. Somehow Saudi Arabia was going to get American nuclear power, and the Iranians were going to be damned if they just sat there and watched this happen. There's no way they're going to sit quietly and let the United States construct the Israeli-Saudi strategic and economic front in front of them and give the Saudis nuclear power. And the Iranians looked around and they saw that Israel was completely divided over the judicial reform package. They saw America was paralyzed. You couldn't even elect a Speaker of the House back then. And I don't want to say anything political here, the Iranians were afraid of the return of Donald Trump. Because Trump pulled out of the JCPOA in 2018. Biden sought to renew it. They were afraid he was going to come back. They were looking at the polls. And the Iranians concluded, I believed, that this was an ideal time to start a little war. You settle a world war and it all goes away. And you gotta think like an Iranian sometimes. I try to think like Hamas too. And I got only one thing wrong. I thought it would break out with Hezbollah, because I had served in the government for years and I dealt with Hamas and Gaza extensively, and there was this overwhelming feeling within the Israeli leadership that Hamas could be paid off. You give them a lot of Qatari cash and they're not going to get involved in the war. Hezbollah, all Iran had to do was give a green light to Hezbollah and Hezbollah would start a little war. So we got that wrong, but they got the war right. I believe that if and when we win this war, the Saudis will make peace with us. If we lose the war, I'm doubtful. Why? The Saudis, like other Gulf countries, they're sitting on volcanoes. They're not democracies. Their populations are flagrantly pro-Palestinian. And they have to play a certain lip service, certainly, to that popular opinion. But behind closed doors, they are facing two major threats. One is Sunni extremism in the form of Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood, and Shiite extremism in the form of Iran and Hezbollah. There's only one country in the Middle East that's standing up to both of them, that's fighting both of them. If we win against them, they're going to make peace with us, not because they sit up in the morning and sing Hatikva like you did, because it's in their defense interest, because it's an existential issue for them. So we must prevail. The irony of it, as many ironies are in the Middle East, John Lennon, wherever you are, forgive me, you got to give war a chance. And if you want peace, you've got to win the war. If America stops us again, the world stops us again from crushing Hamas, and they stop us every time, the chances for peace will go way down. That got everyone quiet. Give war a chance. Try singing that one around the campfire with a guitar. Yes, sir. Hi.
Michael.
Okay.
With respect to the Palestinian people, presuming that the Israelis are allowed to continue to fight, how do we get out of this 70-year cycle of hatred? Because we're creating, and my son went to the Israeli Defense Forces. I've told you I'm a strong Zionist supporter of Israel. But
there's a but at the end of this. Go ahead.
But the problem is they keep hating us, and they keep teaching their children to hate us.
They do.
And I don't know that gets resolved militarily.
It can't.
So
I'll tell you right now, it can't.
My thought, and I want to hear what you think about this, is it's the Arab states that have to go in and stop this and say enough, because they're the ones who have to monitor these people. We as Jews can't be monitoring them. It just creates more hate. I want to know what you think about that.
Okay. No, I don't in any way mean to demean the question, but it's actually the most frequently asked question I get on the news. And it was framed in a different way. They'll say, aren't you, by bashing the people of Gaza, aren't you creating the next generation of Hamas terrorists? That's the most frequently asked question. And the answer I'll always give is, yeah, maybe. Okay. If the United States on December 8th, 1941 had said, well, maybe we shouldn't strike back at Japan because we'll be creating the next generation of kamikazes. Okay, that's the type of mentality, but empirically it's untrue. Empirically untrue, yes, we may run a risk of creating more terrorists, but if you look at the sweep of Israeli history going 1948, every war creates a certain momentum to make peace. And what does it mean? The Egyptians tried to destroy us 4 times. And by the way, these are unique wars. Most wars in history are not about destroying other countries. The United States didn't want to destroy Japan, just wanted to change its government. All right? They waged 4 wars of national destruction against us. Before they concluded, guess what, this is not a good idea. And they made peace. Jordanians waged 2 wars of national destruction against us, and they concluded it wasn't a good idea. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, if you had asked me when I moved to Israel in the 1970s that someday they'd be talking peace with me, I'd say, what drug are you on, all right? And how could I get it, right? Amazing. Unconceivable, because they have concluded, after trying many times and failing and paying a very high price for it, that it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And right now, we are witnessing the outbreak of riots in Gaza against Hamas, saying, what have you done to us? Are those people going to join Hamas? Or they'll be more likely in the future to say, maybe the way to ensure a better future for our children, our grandchildren, is not by trying to kill Israeli children and grandchildren. Maybe. Now, having said that, we can't destroy Hamas militarily. We can't. We can ensure that Hamas does not rule Gaza, no longer threatens us, but the idea of Hamas is the same idea of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. They're all exactly the same. They all seek to recreate a medieval caliphate in the Middle East and to then expand it to around the entire globe. They're all exactly the same. Hamas is only different is that it has a certain order, has a priority. First, we destroy Israel. We create a Palestinian Islamic state in Palestine, and then we expand it. That's the only thing that separates Hamas. We can't destroy that. The only thing that can actually change that is education. And that is something that's going to take generations, folks. Palestinian children in Gaza, and to a large extent in the West Bank as well, because when I was in Knesset, I was in charge of I chaired a classified committee that dealt with very sensitive issues behind very closed doors. And one of the issues we looked at was the Palestinian Authority education program. And they are teaching young kids where to stick the knife, how to draw it across a Jew's throat, that you cut all the jugular, but in great detail. This is the Palestinian Authority, our presumptive peace process partners. I don't know if you've ever seen these. They're all available on YouTube, by the way. The education of a Palestinian young person in Gaza, starting at age 2. Sesame Street teaches you how to kill people. That was a great one I saw recently, Sesame Street in Gaza, where they teach you how to stab the President of the United States, how to take over the White House and turn it into a mosque. I am not joking. They go to summer camp to learn how to kill. Their plays in school are all about killing Jews. There was nothing, October 10th, October 7th might have been shocking, but it wasn't surprising. Not the least bit surprising. Now, how do you change that? You think that you're going to wave a magic wand, Deus ex machina, and you're going to create a 2-state solution that's going to be peaceful and everyone's going to live in peace the next day. No, you have to start with education. This is a generational, regional, and international effort. And you're right. The Gulf Arabs have a responsibility to make that change. The Saudis actually are making that change. They're changing their educational program all the time. But that is the only way to bring true peace. You don't create a state situation that has no foundation in it, neither institutional foundation nor psychological or educational foundation. It's going to collapse. It's going to collapse. And it's going to bring half the Middle East down with it. And we have to be extremely, extremely cautious. I've been, last thing I'll say, I've been involved in the peace process for now over 30 years. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, you heard Michael say. I was involved in every peace initiative. I participated in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians. And I will tell you unequivocally that this is not about borders. It's not about territory. It's not about settlements. It's not even about Jerusalem. It's about identity. Identity. Where the head of the Palestinian delegation says to me, you want me to recognize you as a legitimate Jewish state? You're asking me to negate my identity. Go negotiate your way out of that one. A hard one. And this is going to take many, many, many years because generations of Palestinians have now been educated to believe that the only way they can be Palestinian is by denying us, negating us. And that is a very serious situation. Yes, ma'am.
So we have a similar situation in the States dealing with education. We have a generation of children starting, my kids are just graduating college, but I saw this when they were starting in middle school. And now it's into the kindergartens. We have a generation of kids, this anti-Semitism in America didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of the education system. It came out of the elite colleges, and it's filtered down into the primary schools.
Yeah.
So what do we do now? Because now there's this young generation, and we're taught,
Yes.
just like the Palestinians, just like in the Middle East, oppressor oppressed, that the Jews are white and they're the oppressor.
Right.
So what do we do now? How do we remedy that? Because now we have this generation. Is this the last generation of the United States that's going to back Israel? Because this newly educated generation, and everyone, it's been happening, everybody, and you're seeing it now, unfortunately, with the president, and the colleges. But what do we do now? How do we change that? And it seems like it's the same situation in the Middle East as we have in the States, and it's very scary.
Well, first of all, thank you. Unfortunately, no one yet is shooting in the United States the way they are in the Middle East, and certainly not committing the atrocities of October 7th. But some of the processes are similar because young people are being taught to hate. And there are two ways to remedy this. The process that created, this movement in the United States, whether you call it wokeism or other euphemisms, didn't begin yesterday. It began in the 60s. It began with a youth revolution that espoused many of these ideas. None of them are new, really none of them are new. And then tried to export those ideas outside the campus. It didn't work. So they retreated back into the campus and closed the gates behind them and spent the next 50 years instilling these ideas in their students and making sure that the people who got tenure after them had exactly the same ideas. And then their students went forth from those campuses, and they became the head of governments, and they became local, state, federal governments. They became the head of industries. That's where they got it. And when I was in Washington, now this is a decade ago, I knew what professors American officials had studied with just by the words they used. It was amazing. I said, "Oh, you must be this guy's student." It was amazing. And it worked. It worked very, very well. So undoing that process will take a long time. Will take a long time, but it can be done. Just coming here, I guess on Thursday, I did a film down the Gaza border with Barry Weiss, who was my former student, and very proud of her. But she has now started a university in Texas, which is going to take on this. But that's what you have to do. You almost have to form an alternative type of education system. The other way to do this is to fight. And to fight in the true Churchillian sense. You have to fight in the classroom. You have to fight in the syllabus. You have to fight in the courtroom, and you certainly have to fight in the pocketbook. And we've seen how this worked. We've seen how this worked, how it certainly brought down a college president and two, and people saying, okay, enough is enough. This can't go on. Now, you've heard I've taught at some of these universities, and I'll tell you that these universities are the last place in America where there's freedom of speech. The last place. The only true freedom of speech you had was to criticize Israel and harass Jewish students. That was the only true. That was absolutely, by the way, that's incontrovertible, what I just said. I experienced firsthand. That's got to end. That's got to end. And whether you end it on the state level by saying any university that doesn't stand up for true spirit of speech and fighting anti-Semitism doesn't get. You can do it. No one's impairing your right to free speech. You're just saying the people of the state don't have to pay for it. And that's very effective. That's very effective. Let's see what the trustees of these universities say about this. So you can fight, and you can make alternative educational routes. And either way, I believe, I don't know if many believe, this is a fight not over Israel. Let me just say one last thing. I have an article coming out. I have a Substack. This is the new thing. I have my own magazine. I got tired of dealing with editors, so I have my own magazine. It's called Clarity. And I have an article coming out this week about the Culture Conf. And that the congressional hearing with the three heads of universities, Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania, was about anti-Semitism and about Israel, ostensibly, but it really wasn't. It was really about America. It was about the soul of America. And it was very similar to the Dreyfus trial back in the 1890s in France, which was about Dreyfus, about anti-Semitism. It was really then about the soul of France. And so the question I'm raising in the article is, why are these major battles over the soul of a country, why are they fought out within the prism of anti-Semitism and Jews? I'm not going to give you, have to read the article. But it is very interesting. Don't think this is just about Israel and Jews. This is about this country. It's about this civilization. It just happens to be played out through the prism of Jews and Israel. Yes?
Mr. Ambassador, I'm over. It just seems to me you kind of sit there all by yourself in the Middle East, you know, a small country. You have a legendary military. And I have often wondered why you don't make a statement of your own. Why didn't you, and maybe a little late to ask this question now, but why would you just make your statement on the Houthis now? Because that would then make a statement to Iran. And my second question is, where is Jordan in all this? Aren't they a friend of yours?
The Jordanians. Your suggestion that Israel should do something about the Houthis is not the first one I've heard. That the Houthis would be a very excellent target to make a statement about the Middle East. I actually went so far as to look up targets in Yemen on internet. And the horrible thing is you cannot bomb Yemen back to the Stone Age because they're already there. Everything is destroyed. I looked at the presidential palace, it's rubble. Everything's rubble. All right? And until somebody, and this I'll quote the Saudi phrase, and the Saudi phrase is, until you strike the head of the snake's going to keep biting you. It just is. And no one's taken on the head of the snakes. And by the way, I'm highly critical of my own government's policy. For the last 15 years at least, we've played by Iran's rules. They'll send a proxy, they'll send Hezbollah, they'll send Hamas to shoot at us. We shoot back, we get labeled war criminals because they're hiding behind their civilian populations, and we invariably we kill these people inadvertently, but we kill them. We get labeled war criminals. And Iran gets away scot-free. They pay no price whatsoever. I have long been an advocate that every time a rocket goes over our border, every time a bullet goes over our border, we should take out an oil refinery in the Persian Gulf. Forget about shooting back at them. So, some of us here may be old enough to remember Ronald Reagan. And you remember what he did in 1988? Does anyone remember what he did? Yeah. Remember? Yeah, the Iranians started shooting at Kuwaiti tankers. He stuck American flags on them and said, you shoot at one or more of these and see what happens. He took out half the Iranian Navy. And they didn't bother America for a very long time. But that's not going to, if you're not going to say the I word, never mind hit back, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. It isn't. And anybody who thinks differently, it's not.
Mr. Ambassador.
The quickest way is to escalate, is to not stand up to escalation. Anybody from the left? That got you, right? What? Anybody from the left? All these rightists here.
Mr. Ambassador, in 24 years,
Yeah.
Israel is going to face its second century as a country.
Yes.
I know you don't have a crystal ball,
I
but
do.
can you tell us what you feel or what you believe Israel's future looks like?
So about just under a year ago, I published my last book. It's not really a book, it's a manifesto. It's called 2048. You can get it on Amazon. Now it's second printing. It's an interesting book because it's in English, in Hebrew, and in Arabic, all in one book. And it's a project that I began with the Prime Minister one night at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when we used to schmooze. The Knesset adopted a very unfortunate tradition from the Senate. It's called filibuster, where we don't sleep. But if you want to impress your friends at cocktail parties, ask them, what's the Hebrew word for filibuster? The Hebrew word for filibuster is filibuster. And there'd be a filibuster 3 o'clock in the morning, so I was to schmooze with the Prime Minister because he likes talking about books. And one night I came in and I said, we never look at our future. We're always so bogged down in current crises. Let's do a study of what we want Israel to look like on our 100th birthday, 2048. It's coming up in a quarter century. So he said, okay, let's do it. So we started doing this research, and of course the government fell. And then Corona came, and I went back in my room and I wrote this book. And it's kind of a manifesto, and it's 22 chapters that deal with every aspect of Israeli society. It's defense policy, it's Palestinians, it's Israeli Arabs, it's Jews and Israel. I mean, really, it's social policy, education, health. And the idea was to spur a discussion. Now, it's pre-war, but a lot of the problems that I pointed out in 2048, the book, led to October 7th, led to the failure of intelligence and the military of October 7th. So right now, today, we're still discussing 2048. And so the image of the Jewish state in 2048 is one that is certainly educationally and socially sound, economically sound, the country that is much more independent in terms of its foreign policy, not dependent on anybody. Our relationship with the United States is not one where America is giving us aid, but we are engaged as partners in crucial areas such as cyber and laser technologies. It's a country that has managed the Palestinian situation much better. It may not have a solution, but managed it. It's on a much stronger relationship between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. And I think the most important aspect of the book, the sort of the theme of the whole book, is that a state that accepts responsibility for its sovereignty. Now, for 2,000 years, we didn't know sovereignty. We were in exile. And then one day in May 1948, we woke up and found ourselves the proud owner of a sovereign country and didn't even know what the hell to do with it. And there are large sections of the country which are literally the Wild West. Israel is 62% desert. It's the Negev, south of Beersheba. There's no effective sovereignty down there. The Bedouin build hundreds of thousands of legal structures. They have hundreds of thousands of guns, drug trafficking, really no effective sovereignty. And that's true over other areas of Israel and other populations. So a country that is truly healthy, that will survive into the 2nd century, and that's the name of the book, Israel, the rejuvenated state, the 2nd century, will be one that accepts the responsibility of its sovereignty and enforces its sovereignty. We have a lot to learn from America in this. Last chance for the lefties. There we go. We got a centrist. Here.
Involved as you are in policy, what would you like the U.S. to do about Iran?
I would like the United States to do the following. I have an article coming out this week, again, in Substack. It's going to say the following. If America wants a successful a foreign policy, a secure American policy in the Middle East, if it wants allies that trust it and gives America the ability to make peace, America has to have a credible military force, a credible military option. The more credible the option, the less chance you'll actually have to use it. Right? And people have to understand that it is credible, it's real. And America has to say, I think, the following things. Israel, our ally, is involved in an immensely complex, morally, strategically, militarily complex operation. We understand that Israel is doing its utmost to limit, as much as possible, the impact on Palestinian civilians. But we're going to stand foursquare with Israel. We're not going to criticize Israel publicly. We're not going to say Israel is bombing indiscriminately, which the administration has been doing. And with Iran, any more violence in the Middle East, whether it's the Houthis trying to close this vital waterway or shooting at American forces, we're not going to take it out on the militias in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to take it out on Tehran. And watch us. And watch it stop, by the way. Watch it stop. And watch America's ability to broker a peace with Saudi Arabia and Israel watch it greatly go up. People have it so backward that by showing weakness, by showing fear, you're somehow going to avoid violence. No. I should put my cards on the table. I grew up in a Sicilian neighborhood, the only Jewish kid. I got the crap beat out of me every day. Okay? I was the only Jewish kid in this neighborhood, tough guys. And I learned that if you weren't willing to go out there and break the nose of the biggest bully on the block, even though they were going to beat you up next day, you weren't going to survive. You think the Middle East is any different? It's exactly that. It's exactly that. President Obama used to always say that bombing somebody just to show that you can bomb them is the stupidest reason to bomb them. President Obama did not grow up in my Sicilian neighborhood. It's a really good reason to bomb them. The Iranians have to believe that there's a price to be paid here. Why would they stop? You're actually creating a situation where they can't stop because people in their government, in that regime, are going to say, why are you stopping? They're running away. They're running away from you. Keep going. And I can go on a long time here, but let me just say this. The biggest conflict in the Middle East is not between Israelis and Arabs or Israelis and Palestinians, it's between Sunnis and Shiites. And right now, the Sunnis are taking on the Jews, and the Shiites aren't doing nothing. And there's going to be a tremendous pressure on Iran and its proxies, its Shiite proxies, to do something. The United States has to instill a fear that doing this will impose. That's how I said earlier, that's how we got peace with Egypt, how we got peace with Jordan. Not by being nice, but by being tough. Not because we enjoyed it, believe me, and not because it wasn't cost-free. It was anything but cost-free. But that's how we got peace. And that's how you get it in the future. Sir? I'm sorry.
Assuming Hamas is destroyed entirely, the world is looking at a two-state solution.
Right.
What is a compromise that Israel would have in that case?
So I disagree with my government's position. The government's position, Netanyahu has come out and said, when President Biden and his administration come out and say, we want to have a two-state solution, we want a pathway to a two-state solution. My position, I know I seem rather hard-nosed here, but my position is very practical. I think we should say to the president, okay, fine, we'll talk about a pathway to a Palestinian state. Pathway, you know, is the thing with gravel and shrubbery, okay? Pathway, we'll talk about it. It's years down, we'll talk about it. Don't reject it out of hand. Because the most important thing we need from this administration is the continued supply of ammunition and continued vetoes in the Security Council. That's what we need. And I guarantee you that Joe Biden, and I'm not getting partisan here, he's got to be the loneliest person on the planet right now. Because you think that his advisors are going into the Oval Office in the morning and saying, hey, Joe, keep it up. Keep up that ammunition. We're doing well in the polls. No, they're going in and saying, what are you, crazy? You're going to cost us our jobs. And you know, in Israel, we could give him something if it doesn't cost us anything. Let's keep our eye on the ball. The ball is ammo and veto. That's the ball. Be smart. Don't play internal politics with our security. That's what you get to say because you're not ambassador.
Mr. Ambassador, what is your opinion on handling the current situation on the northern border with Lebanon and Hezbollah?
Okay. So cards on the table. Earlier in the first week of the conflict, I published an article in the Israeli press in Hebrew that says we were fighting the wrong war. I'm hemorrhaging people here. Well, this is an exciting answer. You may want to listen to this one. The article said that we're fighting the wrong war, that we should freeze the situation with Hamas because Hamas wasn't going anywhere. Keep hitting it from the air, the ground, the sea, keep them underground, keep pressure up to get the hostages back. But the major threat is Hezbollah. Hamas is a tactical threat to Israel. They know, even if they break through the fence and kill 1,200 Israelis and hit us with 12,000 rockets, because that's what they've fired so far, they can't destroy us. Hezbollah is a strategic threat. 150,000 rockets. Much greater range, much heavier rockets, accurate rockets. We can't withstand that. They have a terrorist force of 100,000 armed men that have spent the last decade massacring Syrians. Imagine what they do to us. It's a strategic threat. The entire northern part of Israel is uninhabitable right now. They're all refugees. We have 200,000 internal refugees. Can't get back. They're shooting at us every day. I said, right now we have called up 360,000 reservists. It's amazing. The United States has sent these aircraft carriers. Okay, let's use them. Let's address this major threat. And then when we get done with Hezbollah, we'll turn to Hamas. So the administration put tremendous pressure on the government. Turned out that I wasn't a lone voice on this. There were people, actually, serious people, including our defense minister, that supported this notion, and they were overridden. They were overruled in a vote, an actual vote they took on it. At the end of the day, we will have no choice. There is now no way you can get Israelis to go back to their homes in the north, knowing what terrorists can do to us and knowing that no fence is impenetrable. Just can't. And so, one way or the other, we're going to have to deal with Hezbollah. And the administration is going to scream bloody murder and probably hold off ammunition supplies. And we're going to have to say to the United States, okay, but if we have to, we'll throw rocks at these guys. And we'll throw rocks at them. Because we really have no choice. That got them quiet.
Mr. Ambassador, I don't think you could find a group of people who are more dedicated to preserve the peace and prosperity of Israel. You always have friends with the Ocean Reef community.
You're amazing.
And we'll do everything we can do to support you. On behalf of Ocean Reef, we thank you for coming.
Close, can I make a concluding remark? You got it. I got it. Okay. Thank you. A concluding remark. as I think I've intimated, I don't represent the state of Israel anymore. But I think I can say with plenipotentiary official that for the people, the state of Israel, I want to thank each and every one of you for what you've done, for your contributions, for your generosity, for your support, for your moral support, your spiritual support. Deeply, deeply appreciated. Thank you all. Da. Thank you.